All right. In this video, I want to talk about fundamentals and fundamentalists because recently I've seen some things where being called a fundamentalist or a fundy is used as some sort of insult. I've seen it used more in the past and I never thought anything of it, but it's popped up again. So I was like, why is fundamentalist or being a fundy an insult? It doesn't make any sense because the fundamentals are fundamental in that they're needed. It's the foundation, right? So without the fundamentals, you're not going to have a structure, right? If you're going to build the house, you need the fundamentals. You need the foundation, the skeletal structure of the walls and the roof to be able to build everything up, right? You need the fundamentals. It's something that is needed. And when you get away from the fundamentals, that's when things mess up, right? If you play sports, you play some football, you do boxing, or any other kind of sport, or even any kind of trade, you're into welding, carpentry, or even do culinary arts, you're doing cooking and all that. There's times where you would venture off and experiment and what have you because you built up your confidence. You know how to play the game, you know how to do the trade, and you step out and you try to do some new things or add to your repertoire, right? And you get maybe a little cocky and you fall away, right? And what do you need to do? You need to come back to the fundamentals. But when I put fundamentals, it comes up basics here. And it's basically the same thing, right? It's the basics, the simple things that are required, right? If you don't have these things, then it's not going to work, right? Boxing, you need a fundamentals, the basics of your footwork and your hand placement and your movement so that you can do the basics of blocking and throwing a jab and a counter. And there you go. You got your fundamentals, your basics, and now you can build off of that. If you don't have those fundamentals, those basics, you can't build up, right? And if you start messing up where you start losing your fights or you're getting messed up in your fights and your fights are becoming more difficult, a lot of times what they do is a little reset and come back to the fundamentals, to the basics, and restart and establish that to get your thinking back to being simple and build up the confidence again, right? And I like what one of these said down here. It says, going back to the basics will strengthen your foundations. I liked what that one said, right? And it's what you need, right? Where Jesus says that he is our rock. And at the end of the Sermon of the Mount in Matthew chapter 5 through 7, he says that whoever builds upon what he's teaching is like somebody who's built upon a rock. They got a solid foundation. And those who don't, as if they build up on sand and shifting sand, so that their building will collapse if anything happens, like a storm or what have you, a flood. Their building is going to come down because they have no foundation. They don't have the fundamentals, the basics. So when they make fun of like being a fundy, it doesn't make sense to me. Oh, you stick to the basics, to the foundation. So you are some kind of, I don't know, simpleton, dumbass, loser. It's like, it doesn't make any sense, but apparently it's an insult. I don't know if there's any other good ones. I didn't keep looking, but there might be some other ones here. Oh, here's a good one. A legendary coach in football says excellence is achieved by the mastery of the fundamentals, right? It's about focusing on the fundamentals, the basics. And this is a legendary coach for football. The Super Bowl trophy is named after him, the Lombardi trophy. And he's talking about mastery of the fundamentals. is where you get your excellency, right? It's about those little simple things, right? We try to overcomplicate things, and when we overcomplicate things, that's when we get into trouble. And I was like, you know what? This is a good example right here, right? Where Jesus is talking about the commandment of God, right? And what the commandment of God is what Moses said, and that is the word of God, right? So we got Moses, the Torah. That's the fundamentals, right? Your basics, the standard. And what's going on here is that the religious leaders were doing their own thing. They started doing their own traditions. And they were making it a big deal that their traditions are not being followed, as if it means something, as if it's important, as if it's equal to the word of God. And they'll dismiss the word of God, like Jesus is talking about down here, but they don't want you to dismiss their tradition, right? And Jesus says to them, well has Isaiah prophesied of you. You honor me with your lips, but your heart's far from me. You worship me in vain, teaching doctrines of men instead of the commandments of God here, right? And this is what happens when you get away from the fundamentals. You start building up your own little system. Another good example over here is is it First or Second Corinthians? First Corinthians, I think it is. I use First and Second Corinthians chapter 3 a lot, so sometimes I get them intertwined. Yeah, see right here, the foundation. What Paul's talking about, the foundation is Jesus, right? And we build upon that. And whatever we build upon the foundation is going to be tested by fire, right? So if you're not true to the foundation, then whatever you build up is going to be burned up, and you're not going to have anything. And that's what was going on in Mark chapter 7 there. They were building up the wood, hay, and stubble, and not stones and silver and gold that could withstand the fire. So it's just going to be burned up. And that's basically how it is with a lot of Christianity, the majority of Christianity. They're building up wood, hay, and stubble upon this foundation, and that's if they're even building on the foundation. Sometimes they may be building gold, silver, and precious stones, but they're building upon sand. They're not even building upon Jesus. So even if they're building up something good, they're not building on the proper foundation. So either their work is going to be burned up, or something's going to come along and everything's going to collapse because they weren't built on the proper foundation, right? An example of this is somebody like, what pops into my mind is that guy from Houston, that Joel Osteen guy. He looks like he's building up a lot of faith, building up a lot of people, and bringing a lot of people into the faith. But his foundation's not Jesus. His foundation is prosperity and living it up in this world, which is the opposite of what Jesus did, right? So he's building up what looks great, but once the storm comes, it's all going to come crumbling down, right? Because these people are not being prosperous, they're not being blessed by God, so they're going to fall away because they're built upon the shifting sand. And nothing in this world is permanent, it's all temporary. So even if you're blessed for a while, no reason to think it's going to last, right? And if it doesn't last, you're going to think that God's against you, and it's going to fall away. So we see here about how the fundamentals are very important. And being called a fundamentalist or a Fundy, I don't see how it's an insult. It's basically just a way to dismiss whatever's being talked about, is basically what it is. Like I hear it in the example of, oh, you must be a Fundy, or, oh, you would believe this unless you're a Fundy, or something along those lines, as if that won the argument and now you're disproven because you're a fundamentalist. That means you're wrong and I'm right. How does that make any sense, right? In any other situation, like I said, we bring it to some kind of sport, some kind of trade, we bring it into the military. In the military, it's keep it simple, stupid. Stick to the basics. You're messing up at the range with your shots. We'll come back to the fundamentals of your breathing and your trigger squeeze and these simple things. You keep it simple, stupid, and you focus on that until it just becomes natural, your muscle memory, right? The way you breathe and the way you squeeze the trigger, right? And then you get back on track, right? There's nothing wrong with being a fundamentalist. Being a fundamentalist in anything you're doing is a good thing. It's going to benefit you. But when it comes to Christianity, for some reason, it's an insult. When it's more of a testimony against you that you're falling away. But anyway, thanks for watching and take care.